Hey guys, and welcome to video number 4. I'm going to try to keep this video as short and sweet as possible, as it's not so much much of a musical video, so this is very much for people who own the Octatrack or people who are intensely interested in learning sort of the inner workings and how to operate the Octatrack. So just some forewarning here, there's not going to be a ton of musical examples, but there will be a lot of navigating to different things and sort of giving you an insight on how to make sense of what's going on within the Octatrack so that you don't get lost. This is the reason I came up with this topic is because I feel like the biggest complaint that people have with the Octatrack is that it's easy to get lost. It's easy to sort of not understand what sounds are coming out or why they're coming out, and it's easy to sort of just like lose your head a little bit. So I decided to make a video that's just all about how to reset when you're lost or how to troubleshoot properly. The first tool of this series is saving. And I don't just mean saving a project, which is obviously extremely important, but saving intermittently in such a way that you can go back to a version of the project that you recognize. Especially in the case of my own sort of style. If you've seen my other videos, my goal is to sort of create a project that I can sort of improvise with that is basically a blank slate. And because of that, I use a lot of saving and reloading. And so, you know, if I save a version of my project that I like, which basically has pre-sliced triggers, so for example, this sample is playing properly because I have pre-sliced it into 16 slices. I've assigned each of these to linear locks, so it's slice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what that means is when I play it, each slice is playing consecutively, which makes it sound like it's one sample together, even though I can move this without changing the tempo. And that's only possible because I have the pattern set out in front of me like this. And so when I have projects set up in this way, I don't have to worry about like rearming this pattern every single time. I can just, you know, if I mess it up a bunch, I can just reload the project. Next, we're going to talk about banks, and I actually just learned about banks about an hour ago because I noticed this setting in the project's settings, and I went down and I found this thing that is called save current bank, reload current bank. And so in order to understand that, it's important to realize that banks are actually a collection of patterns and parts. So if anybody's familiar with the Octatrack, a part contains things like parameter settings, what effects are on, what machines are assigned to which tracks, and also scenes. So one part can contain 16 scenes. Now a bank not only does that, but it also holds 16 patterns. So it's actually quite powerful to save and reload banks. And this actually isn't something that I do very frequently, but I'm beginning to realize that it could be extremely powerful. So I'm just going to use it. I'm going to include it in my lesson here because when you press bank, you can actually select, you know, one of 16 banks. So if I go here, I have an entirely new set of patterns like that. Right, okay. So I just selected bank number 2, and now my entire set of patterns has been switched over to this empty template. And what's exciting about that is I can save that as its own set. So before today, basically, I thought that there was no way of reloading a pattern. And this gets to be a bit hairy because this is why I have 16 patterns set out here. They're actually identical to each other, but I know that whenever I go through a pattern, by the time I'm done with it, it's all chopped up. There's, stuff thrown all over the place, and it's not really worth exploring in an improvisational way, because the moment I start playing it, I'm not actually in control of what's going on. But with banks, you can actually save a clean version of the pattern that you really like. The easiest way to demonstrate this is to actually have your first bank be that template. So say I have this saved, and for some reason I want to have a kick on every beat. But then I realized that at some point during the project, I don't actually want that anymore. I can just reload. And this actually shows how deep the Octatrack actually is, because within one project, you have 16 banks, within which are 16 patterns and 4 parts. So that turns into what? Like 64 parts and 256 patterns that are all available to you within one project. And I actually didn't know that until this morning. The third thing that you can reload, aside from projects and banks, is parts. And this is interesting on a couple levels. So I talked about parts briefly in the last video about cues, because you can turn a pickup machine into a flex machine, which allows you to slice up a looped sample very quickly. And all you have to do is switch between one part and another. Aside from that, though, you can use parts. If anybody's read Merlin's guide, which I highly recommend, I'll link that in the comment and in the description below. If anybody's read Merlin's guide, parts are kind of a good way to set up a base camp for what you happen to be doing right now within a project. And then when you want to go back to that base camp, you just hit function Q, and it'll allow you to reload the part there. So I could kind of demonstrate something like that. So, well, first let's make sure that the part is saved. All right, part 2 saved. And once I'm satisfied with that, but I want to go back, so obviously this is good for if you kind of want just like a kill switch to get back to where you were going before you saved the part. But it's also actually kind of a cool way to creatively create a build. You don't have to be as worried about, what am I doing to my project if you're moving all these parameters and you know that you can go back to this base camp. So I would recommend trying it out as a live performance tool. And it's not limited to just parameters, because scenes can do that. This is kind of something that I thought about while I was making this video. Is there's a lot of overlap between using a part as a way to reset parameters, but you can do that with a scene. The one thing that you can't do with a scene is change up the effects and the machines. So in the case of what I'm talking about, creatively using a part, you wouldn't necessarily change the machine out, unless you were talking about doing a pickup machine. But what I'm talking more about is kind of switching up the effects. So say I have, let's do this. I'm going to turn off the kick. this a chorus effect? I'm going to put a comb filter on D. Reload the part. So you can imagine some of the creative possibilities that arise from sort of just messing around with different effects. Not only is this a good way to experiment without repercussions, but it's also a good way to learn what kinds of things work and what kind of things don't work. And if you are, trying to do an improvised set, or if that's one of your goals, I would highly recommend using parts and beginning to include saving parts, saving banks, saving projects as a creative tool, not just a way to save progress, but a way to save internally while a performance is going on and then recall to that moment. I think this is a really big part of improvisation when it comes to electronic music. When you think about the structures that are in place, what kinds of things are going on. It's important to also note that when you mute something, that does not get saved in your parts. So if I'm doing this, reload, you notice the hi-hat doesn't come back. The implications of this are quite creative as well. So, I'm not going to go too far into the applications of it, because I personally have not used parts as effectively as I should. But given this lesson, I will do my best to do that and apply it in future sets that I hope to upload onto YouTube. I can't make tutorial videos forever. So one step lower, we have scenes and patterns. And I'm not going to go too deep into scenes and patterns, just because there's like so much you can talk about when it comes to those. Suffice it to say that scenes are saved within a part, patterns are saved within a bank. You can have 16 scenes. My personal way of separating scenes out is I use the first few as a way to crossfade between certain tracks that I don't want to bleed into the set, including, if you've watched my second video, sort of using a track as a active recorder of the whole set. So I keep that muted in case I do want to crossfade over to it and then switch out all my other tracks. And then 9, 10, 11, and 12 are kind of my effect tracks for enhancing builds. So if I think I have a filter on 9 for the kick. So that's the first level. I have reverb. I think this is like I don't know what that is. I don't know. But I mean, I think for, when it comes to scenes, it's really up to you. My biggest tip with regards to scenes is don't be afraid of scenes. When I first got the Octatrack, I was really hesitant to use scenes because the parameters on a scene, you can't see them on the screen. And it becomes kind of confusing when, you hear something playing and you're like, but I muted that or something, and you don't understand why it's making noise still. That was really confusing to me, but I would just say, don't be afraid of using scenes to really mess up parameters, because you can always mute a scene. So if I'm just like, what the hell is going on? And I want this screen to reflect, so say I did a bunch of, hold on, I'm just going to do a bunch of stuff on this scene. Kind of crazy that it's just crazy that you can make sounds like that. Anyway, so say I'm just like, what the hell is going on? I can do function B. And then I'm back to whatever this project happens to be playing. All the parameters will correctly reflect it. The scene is deactivated, basically. And the first step to using scenes properly is messing up with them. It really is important to just figure out how you use them personally. I know there's like, if you look at Merlin's guide, he goes through using scenes as a way to progress through a set. So, for example, you would have, a bunch of things muted, and then you would have scene 2, for example. I mean, I think he sets it up so that you go from scene 1 to 9 to 2 to 10 to 3 to 11, so that you know to go back and forth like this. And with each scene, it sort of progresses the set further. But obviously, when it comes to improvised sets, I feel like that's a bit limiting. So I try to keep it a little bit more free, where I sort of separate it out. I separate my effects out here, and I separate my crossfades here, because I'm not really looking to do a linear set. I'm kind of like, the possibilities are just like whatever I want them to be. So yeah, I highly recommend using scenes liberally. The other thing to remember is while you're holding down a scene, you can see which one's activated, and if you want to copy, paste, or clear it, all you do is hold down that scene, press clear. Now that scene is empty. So, that's another kill switch. If you don't like the scene that you created, if you don't want to go in and very carefully tap each knob to reset it, which some people also complain about is pretty frustrating, and I can't disagree. Just clear the whole scene. Press the scene and press clear. Patterns are the same way in a lot of ways. So when I have a scene, for example, hold on, cool. So patterns are a lot the same way in the sense that, if I have linear locks here, which I do, and I'm just going to set this up to be, yeah, cool. Save that. So I use linear sliced locks a lot, and that's kind of my personal approach to slicing, because it allows me to start with the cleanest version of the sample, so that I know what sounds I'm working with, and then from that point I can slice it up. I can listen for something that I like, copy and paste it over. So I'll demonstrate that a little bit here, but just sort of use this as an example of something you could do, or figure out what works for you. All right. So you notice I copied this note over because it stood out to me when I was playing it as one that had a lot of emphasis to it, and I decided to sort of place it later on in the track. You do this by holding a trig and pressing copy and paste. You can also copy over an entire page. So say I like that, and I want to do something with it, but I want to start with this as the template. I hold page and copy. I move to the next page, and I paste it over. Cool. Right. Likewise, you can also copy a pattern from one track to another, so don't be shy with regards to that. The way that I do that usually is, let me reset this real quick, and you reset by holding function clear. to get all the trigs out. So what I did there was just create the same pattern that I had before. I go over to audio slice, and then I go to create linear locks. So now this is all saved in here. And what I can do is take page here, copy it, and then apply it to a different track and paste it over here. Oops. So that's a good way to to reset patterns, to copy and paste patterns over, to clean up patterns. So I think that concludes all of my tips. I could go a lot more specifically, but I think this is a good start to finding your own way through the Octatrack. This is just how I make sense of it, and I'm still figuring things out. And as I learn them, I'll be sure to share them on this channel. So so with that, just remember to save your parts, remember to save your banks, and try out all of these techniques. You may not think that they're for you until you actually try them out. Like scenes were for me. When I first started out, I was kind of afraid of scenes, and I didn't really know what to make of them. But now it's like, you know, if you know that you can mute a scene and you can clear a scene, then it becomes a lot less intimidating to work with. All right, till next time, guys. And I will be uploading a set of my own at some point soon. I've been practicing.